Okay, let's stick with the story and give you just a bit more context. Right now, 83% of vaccinations worldwide have been administered in high to upper middle income countries, compared to only 0.3% of doses in low income countries. James Krellenstein is the co-founder of Prep for All, which is a think tank working to ensure COVID treatments are made universally accessible. James, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with this discussion about what's happening in the United States with Joe Biden moving forward and saying that he wants to move with the waiving of these patent restrictions. Let it be a semi-free-for-all. What do you make of that choice?
I think it's a really good step in the right direction. And I would really like to have other countries, including Canada, join the United States and a lot of countries around the world in voicing support for a temporary waiver of intellectual property for COVID-19 vaccines. In a pandemic, we don't have any time really to have any barrier in place that could prevent the scale up of manufacturing of vaccines. Lives are on the line.
This is something interesting because you said the word temporary, and I'm trying to understand why there's so much emphasis on that word. Why a temporary suspension?
I think that a broader discussion of how we would want to reframe the intellectual property system is needed, but it's not what we can do right now. Okay. What we right now are in is a global emergency where we're seeing more than 10,000 people a day die. So when I say temporary, what I'm saying is we're not rethinking the entire intellectual property system, which I think is needed. What we're saying is right now we have to sort of get rid of every barrier that is in place for vaccine scale-up, and intellectual property is one of those.
Okay. So, and you also said that you think it's a good first step. What then would be the next step and the step after that?
We have three main steps that we need to take to scale up global vaccine production. The first, with the TRIPS waiver, is getting rid of any intellectual property barrier. The second is really working to facilitate what we call tech transfer, which is really the actual sort of, on the ground know-how of how you actually make a vaccine in a factory. And the third thing is we need to scale up actual manufacturing capacity, both in countries like Canada and the United States and around the world. Canada has taken some really good steps in actually scaling up its own manufacturing capacity. As you know, the Trudeau government just announced that they're making a state-run biologics manufacturing facility that is actually going to make the Novavax vaccine in Montreal for Canadians. And I think that we want to see that sort of thing happening around the world. So we have to build new factories. We have to teach people how to actually make the vaccines in those factories, and we have to get rid of the intellectual property barriers. So there's really three distinct steps that we need to take here to make sure everyone who needs a vaccine can get one.
Okay, all of that. The first step sounds easy, just waive it, but then the tech transfer and then the production, that sounds expensive, and who pays for that?
So the tech transfer, while it is complicated, it can be done really, really rapidly. I should be clear. We've seen actually factories come online that make the Moderna vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, in under 6 months from when tech transfer started to when the first doses come out of that factory that go into arms. So we really could do this really rapidly. In terms of cost, it's going to cost probably around $4 to $12 billion to make facilities that could manufacture enough mRNA vaccines, like Moderna's vaccines, like Pfizer's vaccine, for the entire world in a single year. Well, that might seem like a steep price. We have to understand that when there's 10,000 people a day dying, when the global economy is really shutting down in many places because of the continued spread of COVID-19, these costs are very, very tiny compared to the costs that we're incurring. Simply put, we can't afford not to scale up vaccine production capacity.
Well, speaking of scaling up, a lot of people just wonder, why can't the current manufacturing just be increased? Why can't these private companies just make more?
So I think there's two distinct issues that we're talking about here. First of all, there's some reasons to understand that a lot of these companies are not necessarily incentivized to spend the billions of dollars themselves to build facilities that could basically serve the entire world. But the second thing, and this is something that Canada experienced, unfortunately, quite dramatically itself earlier this year, is that a lot of countries want to have control of their own vaccine production supply. Right? What we saw is my country, the United States, actually blocked exports of vaccines to Canada, and Canada was forced to rely on European supply for their vaccines. So it's really important that countries don't rely on a single country like the United States for their vaccine supply, or the European Union. We really do need to decentralize manufacturing across the world, and we need to scale up things as fast as possible. So we need something like a government like the United States or the Canadian government, or a multilateral institution like the World Bank or the United Nations to really step up here and put the money in that's needed to end this plague.
Yeah, we weren't too thrilled when you guys blocked us. I'm just teasing.
Yeah, very nice. It was very neighborly.
But this, sorry, go ahead.
It really shows the problem that we have here, that, no one nation should be dependent on another nation necessarily for its vaccine supply. Right? We see this even with India. India historically is the world's pharmacy. It makes 60% of the world's vaccine. But right now they have a very, very serious domestic crisis with COVID-19. So they've restricted some exports, somewhat understandably, to other countries. But that really puts other countries in a really hard place. So one of the great things about a TRIPS waiver, along with other policy tools, is that we really can actually see that, centralization end and have local decentralized capacity around the world, so we don't repeat this horrible history.
Okay, James, just before I let you go, and my senior producer is going to kill me if we go long, so you have to keep it to 30 seconds, but let's talk about the larger issue of the ethics of keeping people healthy and safe globally and private corporations making money. What's the balancing act here?
So once again, I'm not so necessarily saying that companies can't make any money here, but the first priority must be access. We must have universal global access to highly effective and safe COVID-19 vaccines as soon as possible. We've developed a plan to actually do this. It can be done. It can be done rapidly, probably in under a year. Probably would cost less money than the world economy loses every single day due to COVID-19. This is not about necessarily companies not making money. This is about putting health before profits.
James Krellenstein, the co-founder of Prep for All, joining us from New Haven, Connecticut. Thank you so much, James.
Thank you for having me.